Yeah, in the previous video I did on Tyson Fury, Alexander Usyk, with Philip Herkich being lined up as a replacement, a subscriber of mine, long-term subscriber of mine, Jake, left a comment, and it actually it's warranting a video in of itself. He touched on the fact that Tyson Fury has been WBC heavyweight champion for over 4 years now, just over 4 years, and during which time has made one one mandatory defense of his WBC title. Now, this isn't really having a go at Tyson Fury for that. It's more so the WBC and the absolute mockery they're making of their own mandatory system, which it really is. Fury to be champion for that amount of time, and he's made a defense against Deontay Wilder, Dylan White, and Derek Chisora. Yikes. I mean, in the calendar year of 2023, he didn't make one defense of that WBC title because obviously the Ngannou fight was a non-title fight. It was a 10-rounder. That the WBC just allow that? That's ridiculous. And it's not just Fury that issue is with. You go and you have a look at Charlo. I mean, if people say about Fury, has he ever made a mandatory defense of that WBC title? I know for a while they did that silly, what was it called, the franchise champion, and they had Canelo as franchise champion, they had Charlo as the regular champion, and then they done away, thank God, with that franchise title. I think they have anyway, thank God. I'm sure as hell hope they have. And yeah, has he ever made a defense? And you contrast that. This is what I say with WBC. They're so selective. They have the fighters that they like, and if they like you for whatever reason, maybe you're with a specific promoter, you bring in a lot of money, tends to be the fighters who bring the most money in. They'll bend over backwards for you. They will bend the rules because they can kind of make the rules up as they go along, and won't call mandatories for the most part. They won't really do anything, to be honest with you. They're just trying to keep the fighter happy. But if you're an Artur Beterbiev, and I use him as a very good example, they'll just pluck mandatories out of thin air. I laughed in a bad way last year when Sullivan was saying that to give Tyson Fury a mandatory would be, well, I forget exactly how he worded it, but basically that it wouldn't be right to give him a mandatory. What? What's the point in having a mandatory? What's the point in having sanctioning fees? What's the point in having fighters pay the WBC to sanction their fights in the hope they get ranked so they can get a crack at a title, or at the very least get put into an eliminator to get themselves mandatory? What is the point of that? Because that's what fighters do. When fighters are turning pro, the majority, are trying to make a career. They're trying to make money to support themselves and live comfortably, and obviously to become world champion. They're the two main things that they're trying to do, mainly. And you want to become world champion, yes, you've got 4 major sanctioning bodies, but if you get highly ranked with the WBC, you'd be hoping you'd get at the very least the final eliminator, and that doesn't seem to be happening. So for me, when I look at Sullivan and the way he's managing the WBC or running it, how long term does he plan on actually keeping his head above water? Because if you think of it like this, if you're a manager, you're a promoter, or you're a matchmaker, and you're looking after a young fighter, you'd be saying, well, do you really want to fight even a WBC sanction bout for a silver title? Because you're paying sanction fees to get ranked, but depending on the division, you might not get a crack. You might even get a final eliminator. You might be waiting a long time. Whereas you go and you pay the IBF the sanction fees, you're pretty much guaranteed something if you keep winning. You might not get an immediate crack, but you might get a voluntary. You might get a final eliminator, or maybe 2 final eliminators, and they get made mad. You might get something. They have a good way of doing it, as the WBO. The BBC, it's just you're number 1 ranked. Yeah, let's see how long you can hold on to that. Because you're going to hold on to that for a long time, depending on what division you're in. Now, if you're in a division like light heavyweight, which I always use this analogy, an example I should say, not analogy. When Artur Beterbiev was champion, who did he, so 2021, he fought Adam Deemish or something the guy's name was, and the WBC announced that he would have to make a mandatory defense against Marcus Brown, which he did by the end of the year. Now, Marcus Brown was mandatory, I believe, in spite of the fact that he hadn't actually fought a WBC sanctioned bout, I don't know when, because he was WBA champion for a while after he beat Badu Jack. He lost to Jean Pascal in 2019. And then he had one fight subsequently, which was a 10 rounder, and they were both over the light heavyweight limit. They weren't 200 pounds, but they were high 180s. So he had done virtually nothing, no eliminator whatsoever to earn a WBC crack, but yet he got one. And they did that for Beterbiev, but for some reason to do something, I'm not suggesting you do something similar, but saying to even imply that Fury should have a mandatory or a Charlo or anyone like that is wrong. It's just laughable. But 4 years, 4 and a bit years, one mandatory defence. Now, it's not, as I said, an isolated incident, certainly not a heavyweight. You look at Deontay Wilder's reign, you know, he was mandatory for Berman Stavern. It's interesting, isn't it? Berman Stavern was mandatory for Vitaly Klitschko. He earned that right, beating Chris Arreola in their first fight in 2013. Then he goes and he fights Chris Arreola again in the rematch, but this time it had the vacant title on the line. Wilder is mandatory. The mandatory gets called almost immediately. He fights him in January 2015, loses. Wilder then goes nearly 3 years before making a mandatory defence. And that mandatory defence was against, oh, guess who? Berman Stavern. Then it's 2019, he makes a mandatory defence against Dominic Brazil, who I believe he fought on the undercard of Wilder versus Stavern 2 against Eric Molina, in which was a final eliminator. For Dominic Brazil only, how does that even work? If I remember correctly, that's how it was at the time. How does that even work? So Brazil becomes mandatory. Dylan White's trying to push for his mandatory shot. Finally gets it in 2022, 3 years after the fact. But he gets it. Now, saying that he should have probably got it earlier, but he was knocked out by Povetkin, you know, all that. So you can kind of say, okay, the mandatory kept resetting. But Fury fulfills that obligation 2 years ago, 2 years later, still no mandatory. It's not even that, and I know he's obviously fighting Nusek, so I know that the mandatory would get put on the back burner, but there's not even a mandatory on the horizon. The rumour mill is that Sanchez versus Caballel will act as a final eliminator, but even if it does, and, you know, that's not a bad thing, it's a good fight, it's a good, both of them are formidable challengers, but even if they win, whoever wins, say Frank Sanchez wins, how long before he gets his mandatory shot? You know, it's absolutely insane what's happening with the WBC. It genuinely is. I mean, you look from the outside looking in, why would you even want to fight a WBC sanctioned bout when you see the way they behave, when you see the way Sullivan behaves? I've said it before, the guy has main character syndrome. The guy is just something, he's in a world unto himself. He really is. He's like a tyrannical dictator. A tyrannical dictator who's just drunk on power and just thinks on no consequences. I'm telling you now, he'll look back in a few years and regret the way he's behaved as president of the WBC, because it's going to alienate promoters, it's going to alienate fighters. There are fighters who are going to look at the WBC and be like, do I really want to fight them sanctioned bouts if I might have to wait 2-3 years before I even if I am mandatory to get a crack? I don't want to do that. I've only got so many years where I can make good money and make the most of my ability. I don't want to sit around waiting for a crack at a title. So, yeah, a good comment, and I felt I needed to have a talk about that. 4 years, 4 and a bit years, one mandatory title defence, and none on the horizon. Brilliant. Make that make sense. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Hope you enjoyed the video, people. Smash the like button if you could, and subscribe, of course, as always, if you haven't already. For now, I'll leave it there. Peace.